Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk to you about Bridgerton, the not exactly historically accurate period drama romance series on Netflix, which has everyone, including myself, a little bit obsessed, and the 8 or so books by Julia Quinn, which that series is based on, which follows the love lives of the Bridgerton family, or rather, the children of the Bridgerton family. 4 brothers, 4 sisters, and the little epilogue of how they all lived happily ever after. Now, before we jump into the video, I want to remind you quickly that I have been streaming a lot more on Twitch recently, so if you want to go follow me over there, you can do. I'm playing a lot of puzzle games at the minute, but we're going to branch out and do some other stuff, like I'm going to play Undertale for the first time, and it's going to be really fun, and it's nice because those streams are a lot quieter and more chilled out than my YouTube videos and my YouTube live streams and stuff, because the audience is a lot smaller, so it's really nice and I always see all the chat. And also, if you want kind of like short content from me and short book reviews or little things or silliness or fun or whatever, I'm also on TikTok, even though I feel really, really old, so you can go follow me over there. But the best way to keep in touch with me is to follow me on Instagram. It's at Rachel Oates with a 0 instead of an O because my name was taken. And yeah, I post everything on there, from book recommendations to Kyra pictures to makeup and clothes stuff and a little bit of everything. So yeah, there you go, admin out of the way. Go follow all that stuff if you want. Let's talk about Bridgerton. I'm so bad at this self-promotion stuff. Now, do not get me wrong with this video. I want to say before we go into any of the details, I loved the Bridgerton TV series. The actors are fantastic, and while not historically accurate, I think the costumes and the setting and the music, beautiful, stunning, love it all. I literally binge-watched the entire first season in one day and had absolutely no regrets. It was amazing, and I may or may not have done a rewatch since, and there's that. And I also have to admit, and I did speak about this briefly on TikTok, I actually quite enjoy the books, or at least the ones I've read. So I've just finished the 5th book out of 8 in the series, and I think that's kind of what prompted me to make this video, because I think arguably the 5th book is, other than maybe the first one, the most problematic one so far. And while I've been enjoying the series and I've generally liked it, I do have a lot of issues with it, and I think it brings up a lot of interesting discussions, which is what I want to cover today. It's worth mentioning that all the books have their fair share of problems, but you know, I'm not going to pretend they don't. The genuine question I have to ask, kind of based off the fact that I have mostly enjoyed them and the TV series, is if you can understand that a piece of art has problems, if you're aware of those problems and you don't romanticize or excuse them, can you still enjoy that piece of art in other respects? Or is it just completely written off? We had this discussion on live stream a couple of weeks ago, and you know, I asked this question, can you enjoy art if you don't agree with all of it, or if you don't like all of it, or whatever? Like, for example, hypothetically, could you appreciate a piece of writing by saying, well, it's well written, it uses excellent language, grammar, it's, you know, a beautiful piece linguistically, even if the content it's portraying is offensive? Can you appreciate the quality of writing without appreciating the content of the writing, hypothetically? Or, as the example came up on the live stream, a little less hypothetical and a little more realistic, can you separate the art from the artist and still enjoy a piece of work in that respect? So the example we had was the Harry Potter series. Hypothetically, can you enjoy, for example, a character in a film without liking the actor who portrayed them? Or, a literal example, can you still get enjoyment out of Harry Potter even when J.K. Rowling, the author, is spreading harmful and transphobic messages in her personal life? Do her actions now impact how you view her art from like 20 years ago? And I actually asked a guy I know about this who, don't laugh, he does Harry Potter cosplay on TikTok, and he's quite successful at it. And I asked him, I'm like, how do you separate those things? How do you deal with them? And do you get criticism from this because of how awful J.K. Rowling's been? And he was saying that while he obviously doesn't agree with her and he doesn't want to support Rowling, he doesn't see why he should stop doing something he loves, the Harry Potter cosplay, especially when he's not directly giving her money or anything like that. And I think that's an absolutely fair point, and it makes sense. But on the other hand, some people do criticize him because they're saying, well, even if you're not directly giving her money, you're supporting her art, which indirectly gives her money and support. So I also see that point. Point is, it's not a black and white issue. It's very complicated. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer, and I don't even know if there is an outright answer, but that's okay because that's what we're going to be discussing and working through some thoughts of, and it's okay not to know, you know, it's okay to be confused. It's okay to have an imperfect answer. And so this brings us back to Bridgerton, because the issue isn't with the author. As far as I know, she's not done anything wrong. The issue isn't with any of the actors or the people who made the TV series. The issue is with the content of the books and the actions of the characters in those books and the TV series. The problem is that a lot of really, really harmful actions are brushed over in the books and not taken seriously, or even worse, they're romanticized, and that is a big problem. And I guess my question is, can this harmful content be forgiven and the other parts of the books enjoyed if we're aware of how harmful the harmful bits are? Does that make sense? And so to discuss this, I want to take a look at two of these storylines in particular, and that is Daphne's in the first book and the first season of the TV show, the first book being, I think, The Duke and I, and Eloise's story in the fifth book. Obviously, that's not been transferred to screen yet, but we can talk about the book. So obviously, before we get into details, spoilers ahead for the first 5 books and the first season of the TV series. And also, quick content warning that we are going to be talking about some really difficult topics like consent, coercion, control, abusive relationships, marital rape, difficult stuff, genuinely. So if you need to skip this video for whatever reason, absolutely fine, completely understand it. No pressure there. So to give you some background to the books, the Bridgerton TV and book series follows, unsurprisingly, the Bridgerton family, which is a wealthy and powerful family in early 1800s London, as all of the eight kids try to get married off and find their happy ending. The family consists of the mother, Violet, who is a widow. The father died about 8 years before the series starts, and the 8 kids, who are all named in alphabetical order. You have Anthony, Benedict, Colin, Daphne, Eloise, Francesca, Gregory, and Hyacinth. Yeah, the alphabet thing is a thing. And without further ado, let's jump into Daphne's story, as she's the first kid to get married off and the focus of the first book and first TV series. So in the TV series, Daphne is basically like this perfect young woman just out in society, whereas in the book, she's a little bit older and, you know, she's still kind of struggling to get a husband and get married. There are slight differences between the book and TV series, but for the most part, the difficult bits are nearly the same, but we'll discuss this as we come to it. So at some point in both the book and TV series, Daphne is basically struggling because she doesn't just want to get married off for money or influence or to just anyone who asks her. She properly wants to get married for love. She wants a happy family, a happy marriage. She wants lots and lots and lots of babies, you know, and her family supports this, which is great. They're not forcing her into anything. They're giving her time, they're letting her choose, they completely understand what she wants, and it's great. However, we do see that Anthony, her older brother, the eldest, the head of the family, he's making it really, really difficult for her because he's very overprotective, and he thinks no one is good enough for his little sister, and he basically won't let anyone close enough to her for her to get to know them. So she can't find love because she can't talk to anyone, basically. Obviously, it's kind of controlling, but on the whole, kind of understandable for the time and the era, and honestly, I think it's probably something that a lot of people can still relate to today, even if not this extreme, so there's that. But as she is struggling to get any offers of marriage, she bumps into Simon, the Duke of Hastings, who is an old friend of her brother's. And he's a bit of a bad boy with a bit of a reputation, and he has absolutely no desire to get married or have kids ever, 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 ever. And at first I was kind of excited by this because I was like, oh my god, this is amazing. A lead character in a TV series who is child-free by choice and who doesn't want to get married. I'm like, amazing, brilliant, representation, I love it. And then they had to go and ruin it. That is all soon thrown down the toilet, but we will come to that. So Daphne and Simon begin to spend time together as friends, and it's kind of bizarre. Their plan is weird and highlights a lot of issues because their plan is, if they act like they're dating in public or courting or whatever. Basically, they think if other men see Daphne with Simon, then these other men will get jealous and become interested in Daphne, which is problematic in itself. But if other women see Daphne dating Simon, they'll finally leave him alone, apparently. So weird double standards, but okay. However, this is not the biggest problem by a long, long way. Like I say, it turns out Simon doesn't want marriage or kids purely out of spite for his father, who was really nasty to him. He was quite abusive. And Simon clearly has a lot of massive issues, which he needs a hell of a lot of therapy for. And this is actually one of the reasons I really like the series in general, is that a lot of these lead characters, like Simon, aren't perfect. They're not these like dream men who come in and make everything better. They're imperfect, they're complex, they're a little bit broken at times, but they're real and they have real problems. And I like that. It makes him interesting, sympathetic, relatable, real, kind of grounded more in reality, which is, I guess, kind of new for romance. You know, often you have this like big strong man coming in, saving the day and making everything better. But here you have a man who actually needs a little bit of help himself, who's going through some stuff. And I think that's brilliant and interesting and I love it. My huge issue is how poorly this is handled and resolved. Daphne and Simon become friends, and Daphne absolutely falls for Simon. And Simon is attracted to Daphne so much that he can't keep his hands to himself because he's just a poor man. He can't control his hands or penis, obviously. Yeah. So we have this weird power balance throughout of this naive young girl with genuine feelings and an experienced little bit of a bad boy man who can't keep his pee-pee in his pants. This kind of power imbalance and experience imbalance and imbalance of feelings and everything is apparent in the TV series, but more apparent in the books, more exaggerated. It's worse in the books, basically. And it's very clear through the narration in the books that Simon, it's mostly about lust for him with Daphne. He just wants to put his penis in her, whereas naive young Daphne gets feelings and falls in what she thinks is love with Simon very, very quickly, and it's a lot more serious for her. So again, we have this imbalance, which results basically in Daphne letting Simon kiss her and have a little bit of a grope at a party, because she is, maybe not explicitly, but she's, I guess, trying to convince him to love her too. I mean, I don't know. She's allowed to feel lust as well, don't get me wrong. I think there is lust on her part as well as love. It's also completely valid that she feels lust and wants to experience lust as well. And I get that. And if it was just about that, or if it was written better, I'd be cool with it, I'd respect it. But in the book especially, it's very clear that lust and love are very closely linked for Daphne, and she can't really separate them. Whereas for Simon, they are completely separate. So it feels like while he's just, you know, barreling down the lust line and trying to cut her off from love, he's kind of taken advantage a little bit, is how it reads at times. But Anthony, the older brother, catches them in a compromising position and tries to force Simon to marry Daphne, but Simon says no. And this results in Simon and Anthony, former best friends, having a duel over Daphne, as you do. And basically Simon is like, I would rather you kill me than I have to marry your sister. Why she still wants to marry him at this point, I have no idea, but there we go. But Daphne comes blundering into the situation. She's like, no, guys, stop, no. Anthony's not the only one who saw us. Some gossip in town did as well. And if you don't marry me, Simon, my reputation's ruined and it's all in your hands. I'm gonna be a lonely spinster and it's all your fault. So Simon basically says, ah crap, I am gonna have to marry you, otherwise you'll be ruined, damn it. And that's supposed to kind of be his redemption, or this big romantic gesture, and it's just like, no. Obviously, there are a million issues with this. Essentially, it's an arranged marriage, a forced marriage. Anthony is forcing someone to marry his sister. Anthony is forcing his sister to get married. Daphne doesn't really get a say in if she wants to marry or not, but rather kind of feels like she has to. But also at the same time, Daphne really wants to marry, and it's almost like she's forcing Simon to marry her and guilt-tripping him into it, which is a huge issue. Simon is forced to marry when he doesn't really want to. Society's warped standards about women remaining pure and being ruined if they so much as kiss a man are bizarre and messed up and obviously need critiquing. Obviously, lots and lots of problems, but sadly, this kind of stuff was common for the time, so we can understand why it's in there. And this can be a whole critique of, you know, society at the time. That's fine. It doesn't have to be that problematic. But of course it gets worse. Of course it does. Otherwise I wouldn't be making this video. I think it would be great if we had a period piece like this that we could slightly update slightly. I'm saying slightly a lot. Show more pushback against these boundaries. Show people actively questioning them and why they're there. You know, if you show an actual critique of these things, we can acknowledge that it's a problem, but they're problems we can deal with because they're being questioned, you know? But like I say, after the wedding it gets worse. So Daphne goes into that marriage with absolutely zero sex education. There's a weird scene where her mother's supposed to come in and be like, so I'm supposed to tell you about your wedding night, but I'm really embarrassed, so I'm not going to. And Daphne's like, well, I know you're supposed to, but I'm really embarrassed, so I don't want to hear it. And she learns absolutely nothing. And it's really awkward. And it's like, this is why we need actual sex education these days in schools and stuff. So Daphne goes into this wedding and marriage and whatever, and she doesn't really know what sex is until it's happening to her. And I say to her because at this point she's kind of bewildered and a little bit scared, and as much as maybe they try and make her seem like she's an active participant, she isn't really. She has very little agency in the early sex scenes. And this whole thing is, Daphne goes into this marriage knowing that she's never going to have any kids because Simon tells her he can't have children. And those are his words. He can't have children. And Daphne really, really wants children. The problem is, Simon can have children, he just doesn't want to have children, and he's essentially lying to her. And of course, because Daphne has no idea what sex really is and how it works, she doesn't actually know how a woman gets pregnant. And so she doesn't realize that when Simon pulls out of her every time, he's actively trying to stop her getting pregnant, because it's not that he can't have kids, it's that he won't. So here we have a very sexually experienced man being the only source of sex education for a very naive young woman, and the only things he's telling her and teaching her are the things that are going to benefit him. That is a huge, 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 huge problem, and without proper education, how can Daphne properly consent to anything? However, it gets worse. So Daphne isn't stupid, and she's like, well, why is he, like, pulling out of me every time? What is this wet stuff? I know that sounds gross, but still, this actually happens. So she goes and speaks to a housemaid or a housekeeper or something, and she's like, tell me where the babies come from, essentially. Basically, I like to think this whole storyline is a metaphor for why abstinence-only sex education never works. So Daphne basically figures out that Simon's been lying to her, and she tries to confront him. And she literally says, you took advantage of my stupidity. She let out a disbelieving sigh, the kind that came from the back of one's throat right before it closed up in shock. You must have been so delighted when you realised how little I knew about marital relations. And a little later in the book, we get this scene. The only sign that she heard him was the dark, flashing fury in her eyes. But you see, I didn't really know how that baby was made, so when my husband told me he couldn't have children, I told you that before we got married. I gave you every option to back out. Don't you forget that, he said hotly. Don't you dare forget that. So basically, Simon is arguing that because he said he couldn't have children, she should have known that what that meant was that he didn't want children. And it's difficult because on the one hand, I support his right to remain child-free, but on the other, don't lie to someone going into a marriage. But then basically, after they kind of argue it out a bit, Simon finally reveals that he doesn't want to have kids because of his dad, and it's kind of like trying to spite him and end the family line there. And Daphne seems to sympathise, but not enough to actually change her behaviour in any way or respect his want to be child-free. She's like, no, let me change you. So she's obviously upset about being lied to. Makes perfect sense to me. And she says, you told me you couldn't have children, she interrupted, her eyes flashing with anger. There's a very big difference. Not, Simon said coldly, to me. I can't have children. My soul won't allow it. It's all very dramatic. And I'm actually kind of on Daphne's side here because he, withheld information from her. He lied to her by omission. And no good relationship is built on lies and half-truths and hiding things and manipulation. Like, no, don't like it. But, let's be honest, if they actually bother to communicate and respect each other's wants and needs and wishes here, they could save this still. But it gets worse. Simon decides that he doesn't like the idea of her leaving him and having the family that she wants so much with another man, so he reminds her, and I quote, "You're my wife. Legally, I own you. I can make you want me. And even if I couldn't, you're mine. You belong to me. I could force you to let me stay." Pure romance here, everyone. Beautiful, stunning. This is apparently what we're glamorizing now. So now he's leveraging his power, obviously, but he does start to regret saying that a bit, and he's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done it. And so in this regret, he goes out and he gets very, 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 very drunk, and he disappears for like a day, and then he comes home, and he's off his face drunk, and he basically passes out in bed, and they have a little cuddle, and then Then Daphne wakes up and she looks at her husband in bed, passed out, and I quote, "Daphne felt the strangest, most intoxicating surge of power. He was in her control, she realized. He was asleep, and probably still more than a little bit drunk, and she could do whatever she wanted with him. She could have whatever she wanted." A quick glance at his face told her that he was still sleeping, and she quickly undid his trousers. And then we get literal rape. And if that wasn't bad enough, Simon does actually wake up a little bit during the rape, and he's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'm drunk, but this is cool, whatever." And he actually seems to be enjoying it a little bit. And Daphne literally gets off on this power and says she felt so powerful looming over him. She was in control, and that was the most stunning aphrodisiac she could imagine. And then he is about to finish, and it says, I can't. His eyes pinned upon her with a strange, pleading sort of look, and he made a feeble attempt to pull away. Daphne bore down on him with all her might. He exploded within her, the force of his climax lifting his hips off the bed, pushing her up along with him. She planted her hands underneath him, using all of her strength to hold him against her. She would not lose him this time. She would not lose this chance. Simon's eyes flew open as he came, and he realized too late what he had done. He felt her small hands slip underneath him, pressing him more tightly against the cradle of her womb. He saw the expression of pure ecstasy on her face, and then he suddenly realized she had done this on purpose. She had planned this. Daphne had aroused him in his sleep, taken advantage of him while he was still slightly intoxicated, and held him to her while he poured his seed into her. His eyes widened and fixed on hers. "How could you?" he whispered. Huge, 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 huge problem. Literally marital rape. She's literally trying to get pregnant against his will. Like, none of this is okay. The thing is, in many ways, both of them are victims throughout this story. Simon, because he faced abuse as a child and never learned how to trust or be open with anyone. Daphne, because as a product of the society she lives in, she was never fully educated in a way that truly allowed her to give full consent or make educated decisions or have full agency when it came to her sexual and reproductive rights. And Simon, again, is a victim because by Daphne forcing him to ejaculate in her when he didn't want to, he's not had his reproductive rights respected. He was raped. That's not okay. And the way this is played out on TV, we could perhaps argue that in the series, that Daphne didn't quite have the education to fully know that this was rape. But in the book, it seems at this point, she has come to realize what she's doing. She has been educated. She does understand her actions, and that she knew full well what she was doing and that it was wrong, and she still raped him. So here we have a marriage based on lies, deception, manipulation, being forced into things by society's rules and standards, and literal rape. And this in itself wouldn't be an issue if these plot points were included to teach us a lesson, to be critiqued, to show this is a dysfunctional relationship. But it's not. It never really is. And this is the issue, because the whole thing is just romanticized, and they're held up as this apparently perfect, happy couple. And no. So after the rape, they argue a little bit, but they don't really touch on any of the real issues. And Simon understandably feels ashamed, scared, worried, used, and a whole bunch of other things. And they don't talk for a while, and they start living separately and all this stuff. But then somehow they make up. And I don't really understand how this happens, because Daphne doesn't exactly apologize and realize she was wrong as such. And Simon doesn't really do any work on his issues. It's just he realizes that he misses her. That's it. So he goes to find her. And it turns out she didn't fall pregnant during the rape. So he goes back to her, and then without really doing any work or having any kind of counselling or showing any conscious effort to actually work through his issues, Simon just rolls over and says, I think I love you now. Okay, let's have babies. And she says, I love you too. Let's have babies. And that's it. And then we're told in this book and the next 4 books that they're a blissfully happy couple. Literally, those are the words that are used, who adore each other and have a million babies, and Daphne gets everything she ever wanted, and apparently all Simon's problems are just miraculously cured, and the fact that he lied to and manipulated her and that she raped him are just never mentioned or brought up or dealt with ever again. It's all just magically swept under the rug because reasons. And that's wherein the problem lies. Not only are the issues in Bridgerton, both the series and the book, never really worked on, and a resolution isn't really worked for, but the problems are often romanticised and glamorised slightly, and everyone in society thinks this is a perfect couple. Everyone reading is told this is a perfect couple. And I'm like, I'm sorry, are we saying this rape scene just didn't happen? Are we just gonna pretend that wasn't in there? And if anything, Daphne, the rapist, is portrayed as the victim in that situation because, oh, she just really wanted to have babies, and you can't blame a woman for wanting babies. It's like, yes, you can. It's alright, Angel, I'm not actually mad, don't worry. And so this leads me to the question, is it still okay to enjoy this book and series when it has such big glaring issues? I think it's more than okay to include plot points like this and show your heroes or protagonists as making mistakes, as long as we see actual redemption and learning and growth, and the reader can see that their actions were wrong and why they're wrong, and the characters see this as well. But if these factors aren't addressed, like in this book, then is that where there's a problem? But what if these issues aren't addressed but the reader's still aware of them? Is it still okay to enjoy the rest of the media? I don't know. And this is where I have very conflicting feelings. But before you form a full opinion, I want to talk a little bit about Eloise and book 5, which is To Sir Philip with Love. So Eloise is Daphne's younger sister, and up until book 5, Eloise's story, she was actually one of my favourite characters in Bridgerton because she was smart, she's outspoken, she's not afraid to push back against society's standards. Plus, in book 4 and the start of book 5, she is my age and unmarried, not because she hasn't had any offers, but because she just hasn't found the right person yet. So while the rest of society is being rude and calling her a spinster and all this other stuff, she's just there all like, well, I'd rather be happy alone than unhappy with the wrong person. And I am here for that. I love that. It is nice seeing someone in a romance series who is happy being alone. Love it. Loved Eloise. Thought she was amazing. And this book ruined her character completely. Her character development from the last 4 books was just completely thrown out in the 5th book in order to make her just another silly little girl who overlooks all of a man's flaws and bends to society's ridiculous standards and rules just to get her generic, oh, I'm finally a wife and mother, happy ending. It annoys me. So, beginning of book 5, we learn that Eloise has spent the last year writing letters to a man, Philip, and she runs away to meet him, because why not? It's kind of odd. So this man is Philip, or Sir Philip Crane, and he was married to Eloise's cousin who died. And it turns out the wife committed suicide, and this is a whole other issue I have with this book, because the horrific stigma and shaming around suicide and depression in this book is so damaging and so problematic in itself, but that is a whole other videos worth of thoughts. So they start writing to each other after the wife dies, and Philip decides, no exaggeration here, I'm a crap father, my house is falling apart, maybe I should marry someone so she can be a mother and a housekeeper and do all the jobs that I don't want to do. Hey, this woman I've been writing to, she's a spinster, she must be desperate, I'll ask her. Literally, that is the premise of this book. So she runs away to visit him with, oh my god, no chaperone. Oh, the scandal. And he is absolutely shocked on meeting her to find that she's not ugly. What I know, because she's 28 and she's a spinster. Of course she was going to be ugly. Anyway, so when he realizes that, oh no, wait, maybe she's a little bit attractive, he's like, well, maybe she can be more than a housekeeper. Maybe she can be more than just a mother to my kids. Maybe she can also be a sex doll. Wonderful. So, meanwhile, he's moody and distant and quite rude to her, and she's basically begging for his just, like, attention and a little bit of conversation and to actually get to know him. And he's just like, nah. And as this is happening, the Bridgerton brothers show up, and as is typical of them, are like, this is scandalous, you must marry my sister. Or, as Anthony says, your Sir Philip may come to visit you each day, if at the end of the week I determine that he is good enough to marry my sister, you will do so. Immediately. Because who wants to pick your own husband when your brother can do it for you? And everyone knows it is only appropriate that you marry the first man that you spend more than 5 minutes alone with. Come on. We've all done it, right? And at this point, I would have loved for the book to just go in a completely different direction. And I still had hopes at this point. I'm thinking maybe it will. Maybe we're going to get like Eloise being like, actually, this guy isn't for me. I want to stay alone. Screw you men. Screw your society. Screw your standards and gender roles. I'm going to run away by myself and travel the world. That is what I was hoping for. That is the opposite of what we got. So instead, in this week when they're supposed to be getting to know each other, Philip is still just quite distant with Eloise, and instead he spends his time going and getting drunk with her brothers and ignoring her, and then one day he's like, wait, what do you mean you don't think we might be suited? We're suited! And then he drags her alone into a room and just slips her a bit of finger. And the book tells us that, as his finger slid inside, she knew that in that moment, she no longer belonged to herself. She was his. Because in that moment, for this second, she lived for him. And of course, Philip in this moment, if you want to know how he was feeling, he wanted to own her, to possess her, which we all know is a strong foundation for any happy, equal marriage. So they get married, and they immediately have lots of perfect sex, and oh my god, right, that is the other issue with this book. There's a lot of women losing their virginity scenes, and in each one, every woman has the same experience. The minute a man looks at her or touches her or kisses her, she is immediately dripping wet, of course. She doesn't know what's happening, but by God, it feels right, apparently. All the women have exactly the same hymen, situation, and anatomy in which a man must force his way past in order to get to the goods inside. Then, of course, after the man has forced his way past, there's a small little gasp of pain, and then suddenly just orgasm after orgasm, because every man in this series is an absolute sex god. You okay there? I'm sorry, but if I have to read one more description of some man thrusting against a womb, I think my own womb may spontaneously combust in order to ensure that never happens to me. It's not sexy, let's be honest. In a single fluid motion, so fast that it took her breath away, he was inside her, embedded to the hilt, knocking against her womb with enough force to jolt a surprised little "oh" from her lips. How was this written by a woman? And is this a woman who has ever had sex? Because that does not sound pleasant. So anyway, they do get married, and Philip thinks it's the perfect marriage because he can run off to his greenhouse every day and hide in there. Meanwhile, Eloise is left to run the house and look after his kids, and all he has to do is show up at night and have sex with her. And he's like, bro, this is the life. Meanwhile, Eloise is like, what about friendship? What about conversation? What about being a team? What about someone treating me like an actual human being for once? I'm not just here to be a nanny to your kids, mate. And he's like, what? And it causes a whole argument. There's this part where Philip is literally thinking to himself, there was no reason to worry if occasionally their conversations dwindled off into nothingness. Most of the time they dwindled right into bed, which was perfectly fine by him. And then all this comes to a head when she has this sneaking suspicion that the actual nanny might be abusing his kids and beating them. I mean, they're clearly scared of her. And, spoiler alert, she's right. So Eloise goes to talk to Philip about this and is like, hey, work with me on this, I have some concerns. And his response is basically to tell her to be quiet and try to have sex with her. Here are some of the highlights. She was intoxicating, and he was aching with desire, and if he could only get her to stop talking, he could probably maneuver her to the bedroom, where they could have considerably more fun. I trust your judgment, he said, thinking that would placate her. And besides, it was the truth. It's why I married you. I was trying to talk with you, she explained. You're always trying to talk with me, he pointed out. That's all you ever do. Talk, talk, talk. She drew back. If you didn't like it, she said in a snipey voice, you shouldn't have married me. It wasn't as if I had a choice in the matter. Every now and then, he said, feeling quite superior, you might consider shutting your mouth and using it for some other purpose. I'm sorry you find my propensity for speech so offensive, she ground out, but I was trying to talk to you about something important and you tried to kiss me. He shrugged. I always try to kiss you. You're my wife. What the hell else am I supposed to do? He snapped. He was convinced that his was the perfect marriage, and she was complaining. He'd been so sure he'd gotten it right this time. And then, when she won't actually shut up and just suck his penis, he gets mad and says, or rather, he leaned forward, deliberately using his size to intimidate her, which is literally a tactic of abusers. Not okay. But apparently, again, this is fine, this is forgiven, it's romanticized because apparently he sort of regrets it, although the best we ever actually get is he didn't want Eloise to be unhappy. He didn't want her to regret her marriage, even for one moment. He wanted his marriage back the way he thought it was. Easy and comfortable by day, fiery and passionate by night. So he hasn't actually realised what he's done wrong. He just realises that his life's going to be easier and he can have more sex if he apologises and maybe spends a bit more time with the kids and just kind of placates her a bit. So he fires the nanny, he helps Eloise's nephew who's ill, and then he agrees to be a bit more of a dad to the kids, and suddenly, without any work or real effort or real understanding of any of their issues, everything is suddenly perfect and everyone's happy. And of course, the book ends with Eloise being pregnant, because we all know that marriage and pregnancy is the only way for a woman to ever be happy. And this is why I have huge issues with this book, because Eloise is such a strong and independent woman, and Philip never really bothers to understand this or really see that or appreciate that in her. At best, we get him learning to tolerate her or ignore her talkative nature, rather than actually see how awesome it is and learn to love her for it. There's none of that. It's very disappointing. You know, and Eloise, our strong, independent, outspoken woman who goes against society's norms, she only gets her happy ending once she falls into her rightful place as wife, mother, sex doll. It's kind of gross. It's a shame, it's disappointing, and this is the issue I have with literally all the storylines in Bridgerton. They all come back to this. Woman is wife, mother, sex doll, and that's the only way she can be happy. So, in conclusion, what does all this mean? Well, I still enjoy the characters on the whole. I like that outside the disgustingly perfect Bridgerton family, the characters are genuinely complex and imperfect and interesting. I think that's great. A lot of the dialogue is witty and fun, and I like that. The relationship between the Bridgerton siblings is mostly lovely and enjoyable to read if you get over the men being quite controlling with their sisters. And it's nice to see at least some attempts at pushback against society's standards for women and gender roles, even if it's not as much as I would have liked. However, there are still a lot of problems with this series as a whole, especially when it comes to consent, coercion, controlling behaviour, and just general lack of communication between couples, which is all covered up by pretending it's all romantic and glamorous and blah 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 because they have really good sex. So, to go back to my final question, can you still enjoy these books and TV series while understanding there's problematic behaviour in them? I don't know. And I don't think it's a simple yes or no. It's not a black and white issue. It's complicated. I think, honestly, it's up for you as an individual to decide. But what I will say is that at least these books and the TV series have made me think a lot, and they've made me consider these issues. So clearly that's a good thing, at least I think. And if it gets people talking about issues like consent and relationships and abusive relationships, then I think that's another really positive thing. It also seems to me that the TV series is trying to alter or maybe fix some of these issues, even if they are still leaving a lot of problematic things in. So while that's not a complete positive, it is a good step forward, and I'll be very interested to see where they go from here and how they tackle some of the other storylines and issues and character arcs as they come up. And I guess that's just kind of like the end of my thoughts and where I want to end this today. But I would love to hand this over to you guys and know, what are your thoughts on the Bridgerton books and TV series? Where do you fall on this? Knowing what you know about the books now, will you be continuing to watch the series? Will you watch the series if you haven't already, knowing what's in it? How do you feel about these issues being included but not really addressed or critiqued as such? And do you think it's fair to enjoy certain bits of art even when you don't like all of it, or when you find certain bits problematic? Where do you fall on the slightly related issue of separating the art from the artist? Lots and lots of thoughts and conversations to be had here, so I'd love to know your opinions down in the comments. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. I appreciate you guys a hell of a lot, and I will see you again very soon.